Hello everyone! In this video, I will be starting you off with Act 1 of Hamlet. If you haven't watched my Introduction to Hamlet video, please go watch that first before you start reading the play. And just a note, if you are watching on Instagram, this act will probably be split into two different videos, so just watch out for that. So we have Act 1, it starts out on the castle, kind of out where there would be a watch posted. And we have these two watchmen, and then there's this changing of the shift. They're swapping places with some other guards. And in this whole opening bit, you can tell pretty quickly that they're kind of spooked. They're acting alert and cautious. I imagine this scene being kind of misty and dark. We quickly find out that they're nervous because they have seen an apparition of some sort 2 times now. And Horatio doesn't believe them, and so he is there to see what the fuss is about. And Horatio is one of Hamlet's good friends. The ghost appears, and it looks just like the recently dead king of Denmark. Horatio says, "This bodes some strange eruption to our state." Now that line is of note because all throughout this play we see the events and the corruption of the people linked to the health or the well-being of the country. The ghost of the king is a bad omen for this country. Marcellus agrees that something feels wrong in the country. He feels like something's about to happen. He wonders why, quote, "this same strict and most observant watch so nightly toils the subject of the land." You know, why does there have to be this strict guard watch schedule? Why are cannons being made and weapons being brought in? Why are shipbuilders working into the night and even on Sundays? What's going on? And Horatio has an answer. Back when the old king was alive, he had a battle with Fortinbras of Norway. They had an agreement set up that whoever won would surrender his land and his life. Hamlet I, the now dead king, was the one to slay Fortinbras. But now we have Fortinbras II, who is wanting to take back his father's land. So Denmark is preparing for a possible invasion from Norway. Fortinbras was not an actual historical ruler of Norway, but there was a son who tried to take back some land from Denmark after Canute took it, but his name was Olaf. Anyway, they attribute the ghost of the king coming back as related to this dread of an upcoming war. Horatio talks about a time before Julius Caesar fell in Rome and how the dead rose from their graves and walked around in Rome, and there were shooting stars and blood in the dew and signs in the face of the sun, and the moon was eclipsed. And when he says, "the moist star upon whose influence Neptune's empire stands," he means the moon, because the moon controls the tides. And Neptune is the god of the sea, so it's referring to the moon because of its connection to the tides. The moist star upon whose influence Neptune's empire stands. It's just a fun way of saying the moon. And apparently other weird things have been happening in Denmark too, so it would make sense that they would see a ghost during these unsettling times. The ghost startles and leaves once the rooster crows. The erring spirit hides to his confines. So this is referring to the idea that evil creatures hide from the light of day. Marcellus speaks of a myth that the rooster crows all night long at Christmas to keep away all the evil creatures. I want to talk about the ghost for just a minute. In this scene, the language used shows that none of these people, none of these guards or Horatio actually think that the ghost is Hamlet's father, but that maybe it's some sort of supernatural being taking the form of the old king for some purpose. We know that most likely Shakespeare was influenced by an earlier version of Hamlet by Thomas Kyd, like I mentioned in the introduction video. And while we don't have that play today, we know from commentary on that play that it had a ghost as well. It was common for the people of England during Shakespeare's time to study the famous Roman playwrights as a part of their education. The most famous being Seneca, who did tragedies, and Plautus and Terence, who did comedies. Polonius even mentions them in Hamlet. He says, "Seneca cannot be too heavy, nor Plautus too light." Senecan tragedy had a lot of passionate speeches, lots of horrific deeds, lots of speaking about the pain of living, and of course, ghosts. An English translation of Seneca was released in 1559, and it had an influence on a lot of playwrights, and you can really see his influence on Hamlet. And then we have scene 2. We kind of switch gears. We've got all the nobility gathered in the room. Claudius, the new king, who's Hamlet's uncle, Gertrude, Hamlet's mom, Polonius, who's kind of like a courtier or a counselor or something to the king, and he's the father of Laertes and Ophelia. And Ophelia has had some sort of romantic relationship with Hamlet, although we don't know much about their history up to this point. So Claudius gives us some exposition. His brother Hamlet Sr. is dead. Now he is king, and he's both sad because of his brother's death and happy because he has married his brother's widow. We can see from his first lines that he is incredibly good at speaking and persuading, and he's very good at rhetoric and spinning a story that makes him look good and win followers. And you may be wondering, why isn't Hamlet the new king? There's many reasons why this could be. Not every time and place in history just passed on the leadership automatically to the eldest son. That likely wasn't a thing back in Denmark at this time. Hamlet refers to it later a few times as an election, the election of his hopes. And again, at the very end, when he's talking about electing someone else or nominating someone else to be elected. But this wouldn't be an election like we know now, though. Like no ballot boxes, the public wouldn't be like casting votes, but it would be more chosen by an appointed group of supporters. I mean, they could be influenced by the public, but in the early Middle Ages, the new king would have likely been chosen from a very close family member, and very likely, like most of the time, it probably would go to the eldest son. But in some cases, it could go to someone who is older with more experience. But Hamlet isn't a young boy. He's old enough to be king, and he could challenge his uncle. Claudius marrying the queen would definitely bolster his claim to the throne. And Hamlet was away from Denmark when all of this was happening. So it kind of goes without saying that Claudius could be a danger to Hamlet, and Hamlet could be a threat to his kingdom. This is crucial to this play. They are huge threats to each other. And it's very probable that the people in Shakespeare's time watching this would have instantly assessed this. They would have been more used to living in the world of a monarchy and understood that they were threats to each other, that they both probably wanted the throne, and that they're dangerous to each other. And so now we have young Fortinbras, who is of Norway, who is trying to take advantage of a possibly weakened country to get back the land he lost. It's perfect timing for him. And the king tells us that young Fortinbras' uncle is too preoccupied to realize what his nephew is trying to do. So we have a similar situation in Norway as we have in Denmark. The king, Fortinbras, died. His brother is the new king. And the prince, Fortinbras Jr., did not succeed the throne, just like Hamlet didn't. The king is sending a message to the king of Norway to tell him to stop his nephew. Okay, and then we see Hamlet for the first time. And Claudius says, "But now my cousin Hamlet and my son." And Hamlet says to himself, "A little more than kin and less than kind." This basically means he is family in too many ways now for his liking. And this is a play on the proverb, "The nearer in kin, the less in kindness." Speaking of being cruelest to those we are closest to. And he's playing with this proverb. He's playing with the words of it. And he's saying that he is more than kin, so even more closely related to Claudius now, and even less in kindness than if he was just related in one way. Kind could also have a double meaning of natural. So it's also unnatural that he's related in two different ways to Claudius now. We see right off the bat that Hamlet is clever. He often has these hidden meanings in the things he says, and he is also very bitter. And the next line, we get another one of those double meanings. Claudius asks how the clouds still hang over him. Like, why is he still upset still? And he says, "Not so, my lord, I am too much in the sun." So a way of keeping that metaphor of weather going on, but also he's playing with the words and saying he's too much in the sun. He could also mean he's too much a son, S-O-N, being the new son of Claudius. His mom says, people die all the time. Why is this still affecting you so much? Why seems it so particular with thee? And he takes that word seems with disgust, and he retorts, "Seems, madam? Nay, it is. I know not seems." He talks about all these outward signs of grief and how anyone could act and dress the part of grief. And he says, "But I have that within which passeth show. These," talking of his mourning clothes, "but the trappings and the suits of woe." This is interesting that he takes such offense that she uses the word seems to describe his grief. "You seem to be taking this all really hard." And he's like, "Yes, it seems like that because I am taking it hard." But he also goes on later in the play to kind of put on a show and to make himself seem more afflicted by everything than he is. You know, he puts on an antic disposition. And don't get me wrong, he really is truly upset about everything, but he adds another layer onto that in order to protect himself later on. He even uses a play as a means to figure things out. And so he who is obsessed with how things seem to be, and everyone else seeming to be something they're not, he's also obsessed with using acting as a tool. He both can see all the falseness around him and use it as a tool himself. So Gertrude wants Hamlet to stop wearing black in mourning. This could be because it is a reminder to the new king of the old king. And the longer Hamlet wears black, the longer he is showing that he does not accept the new king. And it's possible that Gertrude is trying to keep the peace between her new husband and her son. It is dangerous for them to be at odds with each other. Hamlet continuing to mourn his father is also a show of not supporting the new king. And to me, this first bit kind of tells me something about Gertrude as a character. I don't think she's a very strong person, but I think she is always trying to maybe keep the peace between her husband and her son. I think she's motivated a lot by keeping her husband happy and Hamlet happy and safe. And she's kind of pulled between the two. She's trying to support two mortal enemies. Claudius wants him to stop wearing mourning, and even says that Hamlet will be heir to the throne after Claudius if he can, stay on his good side. And okay, that seems nice and all, but it's also kind of like a slap in the face. Hamlet isn't 12. He's probably around 30. He should have been the king, not heir to his uncle, who is trying to boss him around about his clothes and his schooling. He also doesn't want Hamlet to return to Wittenberg, where he was going to school in Germany. And being in Wittenberg was probably another reason why he didn't get the throne. He just wasn't there in Elsinore. By the time he made it home, the succession was settled. Had he been there, he may have ended up king. But why does Claudius want him to stay in Denmark now? Possibly because he wants to keep an eye on him and make sure he isn't, planning something to take the throne back or to turn against him. Hamlet doesn't really see any other choice, so he agrees when his mother asks him to stay. And Claudius gives him all this praise, loading all the praise onto Hamlet. And I think if I were directing this play, I would really want the actors of Hamlet and Claudius to dig into this kind of unspoken tension between them, this false formality and this underlying sarcasm of these kind words they're saying to each other, this feeling of tension and even danger between them. And it really ramps up the events that are to come. So everyone leaves, and we have Hamlet's first brooding monologue, where he is contemplating the futility of mortality. Oh, that this too sullied flesh would melt, thaw, and resolve itself into a dew, or that the everlasting had not fixed his canon against self-slaughter. He's saying oh, why can't my flesh just melt into a vapor? Why do I have to keep on existing? And he wishes that God had not made it a law to commit suicide. It doesn't seem to, I don't know. This is an interesting question. Is Hamlet suicidal? I don't know. It's hard to say. Or does he actually want to kill himself in this moment? He talks about suicide a lot, at least in contemplation. He certainly is bitter and weary. I don't actually think he's ready to die, though. I don't think he is. Or at least he has some sort of spiritual and moral problem with suicide. But I think he sure fights pretty hard in a lot of this play to save his skin. But I think he definitely is exasperated with life and humanity, and we can see what's eating him up so much. He's sad about his father's death, yes, but he can't even properly grieve because when he gets home from the long trip from Germany to Denmark, he finds that his mom is acting like she has moved on. He really loved his father, and you can see that in his language. Every time he talks about his father, it's just this beautiful praise. He thought of him as a great king and a great husband and father. He compares his father to Hyperion and Claudius to a satyr. Hyperion was the Titan god of the sun. And a satyr is just like a base little goat man. And his mother acted like she loved his father too. And we get this famous line, "Frailty, thy name is woman." He cannot believe his mother would be so flighty. Okay, I'm going to stop here for this little bit. And I will continue on in the next video, and I will tell you more about his mom. And I'll see you in just a minute.